on the car that we have up on the hoist. These are brake pads. So I've got a brake pad here, okay? A brake pad that's worn out, okay? I've got a brake pad here that's separated. So we've actually got the actual pad material that's separated from the backing plate. So this is the backing plate. It's a metal backing plate. And then you've got the actual brake lining or pad material. That this is what we actually measure, okay? So I've got two of them that have been separated, okay? I've also got brake pads with audible or mechanical sensors, and I've got a brake pad here with an electronic sensor, okay? And what that does is it turns on a yellow light on your dash, all right? The other day when we were speaking about different color lights on the dash, we spoke about all the different colors we can have on the dash and what they mean, right? We've got blue lights, we've got green lights, we've got yellow lights, and we've got red lights. The yellow lights simply mean caution, find out what's wrong, you can continue to drive. The red lights mean, wait a minute, stop the vehicle, find out what's wrong before you cause any more severe damage, or it's a real safety problem. Let's get that fixed right away, all right? So this sensor here will turn on a yellow light on most vehicles, okay, to say that you need brake pads. And I'll show you what we're doing, all right? I've also got this brake pad here. So this brake pad shows you no lining. There's no lining on this brake pad. This brake pad has worn all the way down, and we've got a condition called metal to metal. So a metal to metal condition is where the brake pad no longer has any lining, okay? And what we've done is we've gone metal to metal with the backing plate, which is made out of metal, okay? And the rotor, which is made out of metal. So when your lining wears all the way off, you end up with a situation where your brake pad it's gone. The pad itself is gone. What's left is the backing plate for the pad, all right? And that is what's touching the rotor, and it will make a really loud grinding noise when you've got this kind of condition in your car. And again, we'll talk about it, okay? The last one that I've got is a brake pad that's brand new, okay? And I'm gonna show you the difference in thickness. Obviously, you can see it, all right? But we're gonna measure it, and I'm also gonna take the time to show you how we use this tool, okay? So, brake pads. Brake pad has two parts to it. We've got the lining, and then we've got the backing plate. And most brake pads today, they are bonded. So the pad material itself is bonded to the backing plate. So much like these, where the actual pad material has come off. So my pad material has come off of my actual backing plate, okay? Why did that happen? I'll tell you what happened. The glue that bonds the lining, so the brake pad lining, to the actual metal plate for the brake pad, it probably got overheated. So in this particular case, these pads probably seized in their holders. And what I mean by seized was when you've got the squeezing action of your caliper that's squeezing the pads against the rotor, when we release the pads, if the pads have seized in their sliding positions, when we squeeze the pads in, they cannot slide backwards now to not touch the rotor, okay? So if the pads are stuck in a position, they are stuck running against the rotor that's spinning, and these pads will overheat. When the brake pad overheats, the bonding material that holds the brake pad to the backing plate, when that overheats, its adhesive properties no longer exist. And then you have a condition like this where the actual lining, the brake pad lining, will literally just fall off, right? When you pull these things out of the vehicle, okay, they might still be together because they're pressed up against the rotor, but once you pull it out of the vehicle, it'll just separate. And what will you notice when you're doing your inspection? What you'll notice when you're doing your inspection is when you're looking at the actual brake pad, it's going to look like this. And that looks kind of funny because what we've got here is we've got this really big gap between the pad material and the backing plate of the pad. Okay, so our lining, our brake lining that we're looking at whenever we're doing a brake inspection has separated. You can clearly see it separated. And that's, again, one of the things that we're going to be looking for when we're doing an inspection on a vehicle. If you notice a pad that looks like this pad has to be removed from the assembly, and then we have to check to see if it's going to separate. Okay, because once we remove it from the assembly, this can definitely indeed be removed from the actual metal backing plate. Okay, so separation, we're going to check for that. Okay, the other thing that we check for is cracks. So when we've got bad lining material, okay, when it starts to get old, the lining material will start to deteriorate. All right, and when it starts to deteriorate, this lining material will physically crack. This isn't bad. Okay, this lining material isn't bad because it's complete. It's just been separated because these pads have overheated because they were seized in the holders. And these would have been rear brake pads. When you're looking at the difference between front brake pads and rear brake pads, there's a big difference because most of our braking is occurring in the front of the vehicle and we have braking in the rear, but not as much, okay? So on a vehicle that's a front wheel drive vehicle that has the engine and transmission, most of the weight in the front of the car, most of the braking occurs in the front, okay? That's just how it is. Let's take a look at this. This gauge here has different fingers, if you want to call it that, all right? And these fingers, all right, by their color, will tell you the condition of the brake pads, all right? So you've got green, which we all know means everything is okay, go, everything's fine. Then we've got the yellow. Again, it means caution, all right? We're worn out. We're maybe not as good as when we're new, but we're worn out. You want to take precautions, okay, just to make sure that everything is okay. When we get to the red, red generally means, no, let's stop. Something's wrong. Let's fix it, okay? And what you'll notice is the fingers, they're all different thicknesses. So what we're doing with these fingers is we're physically measuring the thickness of the brake pad. And by the brake pad thickness, I mean the thickness of the actual lining, which is this part right here, okay? So when we're measuring the lining thickness, we literally take this tool, and what we do is, it's just a very quick measuring tool, and what we do is this. We're just gonna take our finger, if you wanna call it that, and we're gonna place it up against the brake pad, and we just take a quick measurement. It's not an exact measurement, but it's a quick measurement, and on this actual finger, this finger has a number, all right? And this finger has a number, and on this finger here, I'll bring this down, and there's a number right there, okay? Let me see if I can focus it. I guess these things are moving around. Come on, let's move this out of the way. So on the finger, you've actually got a number, and that number is telling you how thick the brake pad is. So now we can clearly see it. It says 12 millimeters, all right? So from here to the top here is 12 millimeters. If I take my vernier caliper, okay, and I open it up, I take my vernier caliper and I open it up, you can clearly see that that is 12 millimeters, 12.23 millimeters, all right? And that's what these fingers all represent. So as we progressively get thinner and thinner, our numbers get smaller on the fingers and the color changes, okay? So when we're measuring brake pads, we are measuring the thickness of the lining. Quick, easy way to do it. You just kind of shove one of these things in there, and you can clearly see that this is a little bit too big because it's going past the brake pad, okay? And this one is a little bit too small, all right? But you couldn't fit this in between the brake pad and the rotor anyhow because it just wouldn't fit because it's too wide. So at 12 millimeters, these brand new brake pads, okay, they're not as thick as 12 millimeters when they're brand new. We have many, many brake pads that are well over 12 millimeters thick, and that's why we've got a 12 millimeter thick finger on our measuring tool, okay? Brand new pad, never been used, never installed, mechanical sensor, all right? These mechanical sensors that I'm showing you here, the purpose of these mechanical sensors is when the brake pad lining wears out, when it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. As this wears out, it gets thinner and thinner. What ends up happening is this little wear sensor here touches our brake rotor. And when it touches our brake rotor, it sends a very high-pitched noise to the driver to say, okay, something's wrong with your brakes. Let's have them checked. So this mechanical sensor here, it emits a very high-pitched noise when it starts to touch the rotor, okay? This one has an electronic sensor. So when the brake pad wears out, and you can see the brake pad is worn quite a bit here, okay? When the brake pad wears out, this sensor has a little section right here. There's a little section right here. And what ends up happening is as the brake pads get thinner and thinner and thinner, the sensor will electrically either remove the ground from the light or install or put a ground into the light circuit to turn it on, all right? So we've got relays that will stay on with a ground, and we've got relays that will stay on with no ground depending on how it's wired up in the circuit, and that will cause our light to come on. On today's brand new cars, this sensor doesn't actually send a signal to a relay, it will send it to a computer, and then that computer for a braking system will send a signal to the dash computer, so the instrumentation computer, and say, look, something's wrong with the brake pads. I'm receiving a signal from it. Let's turn on the light to warn the driver that the brake pads are low so that they can take it into the mechanics or the dealership or wherever they're taking it to have their brakes inspected because it's a safety hazard, all right? The light will not be red because it's not a hydraulic failure in our system. It's just a brake pad wear issue. And that's not a safety issue, okay? But when you take your car and your brakes are worn, they must tell you that your brakes are worn and the brakes should be replaced, okay? So let's take a look at this pad, for instance, here. So I've just shown you a brake pad that was new, and it was almost 12 millimeters when we were using this, right? So what I did was I just slipped this in ever so quickly, and I'm checking the thickness of our pad. And this one here on this one here, it says 10 millimeters. So these brake pads are thicker than 10 millimeters, and obviously it's in the green, it's okay. We're measuring this brake pad here. We're gonna measure from the yellow surface here to the edge of this dark surface because this is the lining. When we measure this surface, you can clearly see the thickness of it right here will be not even in the yellow. The yellow's too wide, okay? It's actually in the red, all right? And when we're looking at this red, finger right here, okay, the number on it says 2 millimeters, all right? 2 millimeters of brake pad is just not enough, okay? Especially when these pads start at about 13 millimeters thickness. So this brake pad right now at 2 millimeters, it's got about 10% of its serviceable life left on it, and this has to be replaced, all right? If we were to drive this a little bit longer, the sensor, which would wear out this little area right here, would turn the light on, all right? So this customer would have brought the car in with no light on their dash, and yet the technician would have to say, well, I know the light's not on your dashes yet, all right? But you should be replacing your brake pads because you've got about 10% of your serviceable life left on it. On this brake pad here, there's no pad left, okay? So this pad assembly has no lining left. The lining has completely worn right off. I can't even take one of these to measure it because we've gone to the situation, like I said, where it's metal to metal. So the metal backing plate of the actual brake pad was touching the rotor, all right? I can't even put anything on there. There is no pad left. So if you guys are looking real close, there's absolutely nothing left for the pad on this, all right? So there's nothing for me to measure. This one, same situation, okay? So on this brake pad here, we managed to go just like this one. We managed to go metal to metal, all right? And what you can see is, again, these would be front brakes because they're much bigger, okay? So these would be front brakes and these would be back brakes. The condition can still occur for either brakes, whether it's in the front or whether it's in the back. Brake linings wear out, and when they wear out, we can go to a condition where we call it metal to metal. And in this particular situation, guys, as soon as we go to metal, what happens is you damage the actual rotor on the vehicle, and the rotor must be replaced, okay? I had a student come in on Thursday of last week. He only took my grade 10 course, but during that time, he did learn how to service brake pads on a car, and he remembered that. And he's graduated 2 years now, and he came back and he said, "Sir, can you take a look at my car? I just got, my first car, and I'm going to be driving to Campbellford," because he's going to be driving to Campbellford, which is an hour-and-a-half drive every day for his first job at Ontario Power Generation. He's studying to be a mechanical engineer, and so he wants to make sure that everything was okay. He came in, he told me that the mechanic told him that it was going to cost him $280 for front brakes. And you know what he did? He went out, he bought a set of brake pads. The brake pads cost him $50, and he managed to install those brake pads himself with the help of his dad. So by installing brake pads for $50 as compared to $280, he just saved himself well over $200 just by taking my course, right? So once you guys learn how to do this procedure once or even twice, you practice it maybe 2 times, maybe 3 times you're practicing it, and then I'm testing you on it. Once you learn how to do that procedure, replace brake pads or even service brake pads, what you'll realize it is not as difficult as everyone makes it seem. It's not very difficult to change a set of brake pads on a vehicle, all right? It's just a matter of taking the old pads, okay, which have worn out, and replacing them with new pads, okay? I will show you how that's done. I'm not going to show you how that's done today. We're going to do the inspection on the Volvo first, and once we do the inspection on the Volvo, I'll show you a few things that's quite unique to that car because there's a couple of things that need replacing. So we need some hydraulic components that need replacing, and we also need some mechanical components that need replacing. Our mechanical components include the rotors